and we recognise the need for maintaining a balance of nuclear and conventional forces. That is our position, and I understand it is Labour Party position as well.
Questions to the Prime Minister. Question number 1, Mr. Peter Archer.
Mr. Speaker, sir, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall be having further meetings later today.
Mr. Peter Archer.
The Right Honourable Lady, having flatly refused to meet 2 successive presidents of the Methodist Conference, who were asking to see her on the instructions of conference, would she care to indicate whether the deep concerns of the Methodist people are as much a matter of indifference to her as the concerns of the other churches, the Royal College of Nursing, the British Medical Association, the Law Society, the Bar Council, and the Committee of University Vice-Chancellors? Has she ever considered as a possibility that everyone else may be right and that she may be wrong?
I'm very flattered that everyone would like to come and see me. But there just isn't time, I'm afraid, for all that to take place. The President of the Methodist Conference wrote me a letter. I replied very fully to that letter, and the reply received a great deal of publicity, pointing out that in spite of the President of the Methodist Conference complaints, the amount spent on Social Security was vastly in excess of anything under the Labour government, the amount spent on health vastly in excess, and the amount spent on the disabled, and that this government has well and truly discharged its duty of increasing the Social Security available for members of this country.
Mr. Robert Dunn.
Speaker, does the Prime Minister agree with me that the first duty of the British government is to provide the means of defending its people, and that it would be foolish in the extreme to change our defence policy at this moment to take account of the short-term changes that appear to be happening in the Eastern Bloc?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Order!
My honourable friend, the defence policy we have is a NATO defence policy, and that was clear from the replies which I heard to previous questions answered by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State. It is a NATO defence policy. It is flexible response and can only be changed by NATO. And of course, the matters will be considered when the agreements on conventional reductions of arms have been completed, and we shall have to consider them together so that one nation does not take advantage of the reductions over another.
Mr. Kirk.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister join me today in paying tribute to the skill and dedication of all the ambulance workers who worked at the scene of the tragic multiple crash on the M25 last night? Does she agree with me that it is inaccurate as well as insulting for these people to be described merely as professional drivers?
Speaker, I gladly pay tribute, as I have always done, to all the ambulance workers, many of whom are still working full-time, and many of whom in particular are providing full emergency and accident cover. And a number of those at the scene last night were on normal emergency and accident cover in the usual way. As the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, it has been our wish, and I believe the wish of the Ambulance and Health Service, to increase the number of ambulance staff who have paramedical qualifications, and for that reason the pay offered to the ambulance workers, varying between 9% and 16.3%, according to their qualifications and where they work, was slanted towards those who also have paramedical qualifications.
Will the Prime Minister now answer an essential part of the question? Does she agree with me that to describe the people who went to the scene of the crash last night as merely professional drivers is both inaccurate and insulting?
I have gladly paid tribute to the ambulance service and pointed out the fact we require a bigger proportion to have paramedical qualifications.
Order!
They are able to give life-supporting medical treatment at the scene of the accident. For that purpose, we have slanted the offer of pay to the ambulance workers at up to 16.3 in London for those who have the requisite paramedical qualifications.
Sir Anthony Grant.
My right honourable friend agree that it is wholly inappropriate, and indeed has never been the case under any government, for cabinet ministers to directly negotiate with trade unions. And will she confirm in the line that the line which the Secretary of State for Health is taking commands the wholehearted support of Her Majesty's government?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I gladly confirm that, as my honourable friend knows. In the latest offer, which is the 9% to 16.3%, according to where a person works, 16.3% according to where a person works and the qualifications, included some new money, some £6 million of new money, and the National Health Executive had already moved to make that extra money available, and we look forward now to the ambulance people settling.
Mr. Attorney Banks.
Here.
I defer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Banks.
Will the Prime Minister take time today to compare her travel time to work with that taken by the average Londoner? As she sweeps out of Downing Street, past those new Regal gates, with her bulletproof limo with the police holding back the traffic and the angry crowd. I reckon it takes her...
Mr. Banks.
I think her travel time to work's about 90 seconds, and we'd all like that sort of travel time to work. Is she remotely aware of the terrible congestion on London's roads and the appalling state of London transport? Will she come out of that bunker at number 10 and for just once in her life go on public transport in London during the rush hour? Because I think if she did it just once, something would change, whilst Londoners have to do it twice a day.
Speaker, I don't think the honourable gentleman has his facts quite right. I live over the shop, as I have done for years.
Richard Page! Order! Mr. Richard Page! 3, sir.
I refer my honourable friend to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Richard Page!
If my right honourable friend, for perceived electoral advantage, was to change her deeply held views on certain policies, such as unilateral disarmament, the closed shop, sale of council houses and nationalisation, would the voter believe my right honourable friend or any other party that did so from reverting to type after the next general election?
Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend knows, this government's policies are founded on sound principles, strong convictions. The policies will not change. The principles are excellent ones, and they have in fact done very well for the British people, and we shall continue through the next election to pursue, and through the next Parliament, to pursue the same policies which are relevant and beneficial and advantageous to our people.
Andrew Smith, number 5.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Agree with me that in the interests of proper public and parliamentary accountability, her former Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, the Noble Lord Young, must now agree to appear before the Public Accounts Committee to answer for the public losses and the threat to jobs at Cowley and elsewhere arising from the government's giveaway of the Rover Group.
Mr. Speaker, I do not believe that it is at all usual for a minister to appear before a Public Accounts Committee for reasons which the honourable gentleman knows. It is quite a different matter to appear before a Trade and Industry Committee, which I understand my right honourable friend, now my noble friend, has agreed to do so.
Mr. Kenneth Hind, number 6.
I refer my honourable friend to reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Hind.
Does my right honourable friend agree that excessive and irresponsible increases in spending by county councils will lead to vast unnecessary increases in the community charge. Is she aware that the Labour-controlled Lancashire County Council has increased its expenditure by 33.4% in the last 12 months, which would involve, if there was a rate increase this time, that size increase, which would cause unnecessary hardship to the ratepayers of Lancashire?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend that unnecessarily high spending will increase the community charge and be an extra burden upon the electorate whose councils are meant to serve. When we looked at the settlement for this coming year, in our settlement proposals, the provision for council spending this coming year is 11% more than the corresponding figure last year. That should be quite sufficient for reasonable programmes and therefore a reasonable community charge. And if that policy is not being followed, I trust the electorate will know precisely what to do and cast their votes against such councils.
Mrs. Ray Mickey. Number 7.
I refer the honourable lady to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mrs. Mickey.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister say how Scotland is going to benefit from the single European market if the government does not heed the warning given by Sir Robert Reid that there must be substantially increased investment in north-south rail links?
Of course, Scotland will benefit from a whole common market of the kind which we shall have after 1992. First, in Edinburgh, for example, there's a very, very flourishing, thriving financial centre, and one of the things that we are trying to do, in fact, is to get much greater freedom to sell our service in the market with regard to the more practical manufacturing goods and the movement. I hope the honourable lady will read in full Sir Bob Reid's speech, which was very complimentary indeed to the enormous advances which have been made within the last few years during his chairmanship of British Rail. He pointed out a number of things that he wished to see done, some of which require private bills, particularly the link from Heathrow to Paddington, which will affect everyone who comes down that way. And it was some Labour members, not the Honourable Ladies' Party, that prevented the passage of those private bills.
Mr. Timbers, well.
This people think is the first Prime Minister's questions of this decade. Would my right honourable friend take the opportunity of commenting on the staggering recent events in Eastern Europe? And would she take an early opportunity of going over there and telling them the benefits of policies based on democracy and free enterprise?
I gladly respond to my honourable friend. The events in Eastern Europe confirm that socialism has utterly failed and is totally rejected by the people of East Europe, who want much greater freedom than they've ever known before, and a freer market economy and a genuine democracy. We shall do all we can to assist them in that aim, and we are already having extensive help to Poland and Hungary in concert with other countries in the European community.
Don Primarolo.
The honourable lady to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Primarolo.
The Prime Minister referred to this government's sound principles and strong convictions. Could she therefore explain to us, as a mother and a grandmother herself, why her government has introduced social security changes which mean that a 16-year-old pregnant woman living in a hostel only has £3.65 per week to buy her meals and to keep herself, excluding her rent and breakfast? What convictions and what principles are those that are so sound?
As the honourable lady knows, the benefits were changed so that those living in hostels had the same kind of structure of benefit as those living in flats. They got their housing benefit, and of course they would get their rent rebates, and then they have the requisite income support. We believe that that is a very much fairer way than favouring one group who live in one particular kind of accommodation against the other.
Chris Butler, number 9.
I refer my honourable friend to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Chris Butler.
My honourable friend share my disappointment at the bank's withdrawal from the student loan scheme.
that it is naive to depend on alternative economic strategies that involve the banks rationing their own credit at government request alone?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend. I'm sorry that the main banks pulled out of the student loans. I'm afraid it will be disadvantageous for students because it means that they will not be able to have the facilities offered by the local banking branches. So it is unwise of the students to urge the banks to do that, and unwise of the banks to agree to do it, because it harms everyone. Nevertheless, the student loan scheme will go ahead. I agree with my honourable friend about the credit control. Credit control would not work on days when we have no foreign exchange control, and it would be quite absurd to rely upon the banks to try to operate such a system.